Good morning, Hope. My name's Amanda. We sure had a great time celebrating our 50th anniversary as a church last Sunday. You probably noticed when you walked in our big chalkboard full of names. If you and your family haven't had a chance to sign it yet, make sure you do so today by just adding your name and the year you started attending Hope. If you take a look at the seat backs right in front of you, you'll notice our connection cards. These are a great way for you to connect with us and for us to stay connected to you. Please take a moment sometime during our service to fill one out, and you'll be given a chance to turn it in later on. We really want to thank each of you who participated in filling boxes of food for Canning Hunger. Next, we'll be partnering with Operation Christmas Child, where you get to fill shoeboxes with small gifts for children around the world. Shoeboxes are available today after the service in the lobby. Ladies, we have some fun events coming up in December for you. On December 2nd, we'll be having our Jingle and Mingle, and on December 9th, we'll be having our Women's Christmas Party. Men, for you, next Sunday immediately following our service, you'll be meeting at the Irvine Marketplace at the food court to join in a meal together. No one ever says when I grow up, I want to be poor. When we were kids, we all wanted to grow up to have money. We wanted to be rich. But what if I told you that the Bible teaches that being rich has very little to do with money and much more to do with generosity? If that's the case, it doesn't matter what your income is. It doesn't matter how much you have in the bank. It doesn't matter whether you make $5,000 a year or $500,000 a year. Through generosity, each of us can make the decision to be rich.
I don't know about you guys, but I take great pride in picking those songs that back up those videos. And that's about as good as it gets. Baby, you're a rich man. You don't think of yourself as being rich, but you are. You don't think of yourself as being rich. Rich is always somebody else. Rich is the person that has more than you have. That's who's rich. You're not rich. But in 1 Timothy chapter 6, Paul is talking to a young pastor, a young preacher named Timothy. And this is what he says in verses 17 and 18. He says, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share." We begin a new series today called Be Rich. We've already challenged you to be generous. That's what makes a person rich. Not the amount you have in your portfolio or in your bank account. None of that, or the amount you have in your wallet. That's great, and having money is great, but part of the reason we have that money is to be a blessing to others. And like Amanda said, whether you have $500,000 or $5,000, the way you use that money is what will dictate whether or not you truly are rich, at least in biblical terms. Now, Paul's basically telling Timothy here, he's trying to teach Timothy how to teach rich people to be good rich people. Because let's be honest, there's a difference, right? There are good rich people, and there are greedy rich people. There are selfish rich people. There are bad rich people. Now, the temptation is, we read verses like that, and you think to yourself, well, that's not talking to me because I'm not wealthy. These verses aren't talking to me because I'm not rich. And so you immediately begin to think, I can kind of tune this out. I don't have to think about this because it just doesn't apply to me. My guess is that most of us here in this church, we don't think of ourselves as being rich financially. We don't think of ourselves as being wealthy. Let's be honest, we might have some money, but have you driven back up in the hills? We don't have that kind of money, not most of us. You know, we might have some money put away, but have you ever spent some time down at the beach and seen the homes down there? You see, not too many of us think of ourselves as being wealthy or being rich. A rich person, like I said, is someone who has more than we do. And that means that none of us are rich, but we all know someone who's rich, right? That's what that means. You know, I've been to this place called Tacna, Peru a few times, a handful of times in my life. I've gone with this church. Some of you have gone with me. I don't know if that was a pleasure to go with me. It was a great pleasure to go with you guys down there. But Tacna, Peru is is a lot like, not identical, but a lot like Tijuana. If you've ever been to Tijuana, Mexico, the poorest parts of Tijuana, Mexico, you can kind of envision part of Tacna, Peru. Not all of it is like that, but the part that we do most of our ministry in when we're down there is very, very poor. Most of the homes, if you could even call them homes, are just little one-room shacks made of plywood or cardboard or fencing material. They're all basically just one room. If you have a little extra down there, you might have a cinder block one-room shack. But all the places that I went into, they didn't have a floor. It was just dirt. And so when it would rain, the rainwater would wash down the hillside and basically flood through or wash through everybody's house, everybody's living room. I mean, poorest of poor, people living in poverty. Now, I remember flying home, and this is probably not a good thing to admit, but I remember flying home from Peru. It was my third time having gone down there. 3 times. We're flying in over Los Angeles, and it hits me. I'm rich. Don't ask me why it took me 3 times. That probably says a lot about my character. But it did, and it really hit me that 3rd time. I'm rich. I'm wealthy. Compared to what I've just experienced, I'm loaded. You know, here's the truth of the matter. You and I are rich compared to some people in this world. I'll go a step further and say, in fact, you and I, we're rich compared to most people in this world. I'll go a step further and say, you and I are rich compared to almost every person in this world. Most of us in this room, most of us in the church this morning, we are rich in this present world, just like Paul tells Timothy in that verse. We are considered the rich in this present world. Now today, I want to tackle the first part of these 2 great verses. So we're just going to focus in on 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17 this morning. And before I do that, I want you to know that when we get some money, when we get a little bit of wealth, there are side effects to that. There are things that take place in our lives, in our minds, and in our hearts, some negative side effects that come with having money. For example, one of the side effects of having some money, whether you have a little money or a lot of money, remember, we're rich in this present world compared to most. One of the side effects is that rich people are in denial. Have you ever met a rich person that admits they're rich? Have you ever met someone that says they're rich? No, I haven't. I've known very wealthy people in my life, and they wouldn't say that they're rich. They have a hard time admitting that. But if you meet an athlete, he'll admit he's an athlete. When people ask me if I'm tall, yeah, I admit I'm tall. When people ask you if you're short, you admit you're short. Right? We don't have any trouble admitting other things, but when someone asks us or when we consider ourselves to be rich, we live in denial. We don't think of ourselves as being rich. Everyone is rich. They just have a hard time admitting it. We don't want to talk about it. But here's something that you might find really, really hard to digest this morning. If you make $40,000 a year, you are in the top 4% of wage earners in the world. You're rich. Go a step further. If you make $48,000 a year or more, you are in the top 1% of wage earners in the world. So when Paul is telling Timothy how to instruct rich people to be good rich people, he's talking to you. He's talking to me. There might be a few of you that make less than that, but not many in this room are making less than that. Not in Orange County. Most of us are considered rich according to the world's standards. We just don't want to admit it. Now, I acknowledge and I admit that knowing that you might be rich in the top 4% or top 1% or right near that, that doesn't make you feel good, doesn't it? You don't feel any better about yourself knowing that right now, do you? Like nobody jumped up when I said that and went, woohoo, I'm rich. I make $49,000 a year. I'm in the 1%ers. Woohoo! No, I didn't hear it. I got these ears for a reason. I mean, God would want me to hear that. I could have heard you. I didn't hear anybody saying that, so that doesn't make you feel good. Discovering how much better off you are than somebody else really doesn't do it for you, does it? You know why? Because there are side effects to being rich. Let me tell you what the first side effect is of being rich. Rich people confuse being rich with feeling rich. Now, I'm going to get to scripture in a little while, but just hear me out for a few minutes here. Many of us are rich. We're in that top 4%, we're in that top 1%, or we're right near it, but you don't feel rich, do you? And really, you want to feel rich because that's the best part about being rich, is feeling rich. Take you back on a time machine a little bit here. When I was a freshman in high school, I got my first real job. It was an awesome job. You're not going to believe this. You know what I did? Now, picture me in high school. 6'3", I don't know, 160 pounds as a freshman, 150 pounds as a freshman. I worked at the Jenny Craig weight loss centers. It's true. It's true. You know what I did? I was the receptionist. So when people came in wanting to lose weight, you know who they saw? String Bean here. They saw String Bean at the front desk. That was my job. I worked at Jenny Craig for my freshman year in high school. I was the poster child for Slim. Let's just say that. They were using me as, you want to look like this. You know, that was basically what I was there for. Now, as part of my job, I had to wear their shirts. I had a collared shirt that said Jenny Craig, and I had a few t-shirts that said Jenny Craig, and I would wear those t-shirts out and about, not just to work. I had a lot of fun wearing those in public because every time I'd walk out in public with my Jenny Craig t-shirt on, without fail, or almost without fail, someone would say to me, did you go there? Did you use Jenny Craig to lose weight? And I'll be honest, I would always say, no, you know, I work there. But I got a kick out of people asking me that. One day, I thought it'd be real fun to wear my Jenny Craig t-shirt to Disneyland with my friends, knowing people were going to stop me. Again, 6'3", 160 pounds, sopping wet, with clothes on. They're going to want to know how this kid do it, right? I don't know what they're envisioning, how big I was, but this is what they're seeing. I'm walking around Jenny Craig, and people are asking me left and right, you know, hey, did you go to Jenny Craig? No. Did you go to Jenny Craig? Finally, one of my friends had had enough, and when this lady in line at Big Thunder turned to me and said, did you go to Jenny Craig? Before I could answer, he says, yep, and you should have seen what he looked like before. Well, at that point, I had to go along with it. So I have to admit, I told a lie there for a few minutes in that line, but boy, we sure had a lot of fun with that lady. When I worked at Jenny Craig as a receptionist, I got $3.70 an hour. That was my hourly wage in the late 80s. $3.70. I worked about 10 hours a week, maybe 10 hours a week. I remember when I got my first paycheck from Jenny Craig Weight Loss Centers. I'd worked maybe 18 to 20 hours total over 2 weeks, and I'm opening up that paycheck. I played it cool. I waited till I got in the car, and I opened up the envelope that my paycheck was in, and I remember taking a look at that sum, that enormous amount of money that I had earned, and saying, how am I ever going to spend all of this? It was like $75 before taxes. So it was even less than that. But you know what? I felt rich. I had money. I had more money than I'd ever had before, and it was a great feeling. I felt rich. Now, by the world standards, even then, at 88, I wasn't. But I felt rich. Looking back on it, though, I understand now why that first paycheck made me feel that way. Here's why it made me feel rich. It's because I was able to spend that money any way I wanted to. I could spend it on anyone or anything I wanted to. If I wanted to go out and spend it on me, I could. If I wanted to take it out and spend it on my girlfriend, I could. If I wanted to save it, I could. If I wanted to buy a guitar or save to buy a guitar with it, I could. If I wanted to buy a CD or a cassette or a record, I could. If I wanted to go to Del Taco and blow it all on burritos, which is probably what I did, I could. I could do it. And here's why. Because I was a freshman in high school. I lived at home with my parents. They met every need that I had. I had no debt. I didn't have anything or anyone that I was financially responsible for in any way at all. I didn't have a lot of money, but I had something called margin. I had extra. I had a buffer. I had the freedom to spend the little money I had however I wanted, wherever I wanted, on whomever I wanted. And guess what? That margin made me feel rich. You know what causes you to feel not rich? A lack of margin. You're overextended financially. So you don't have the freedom to do with your money what you will. And because of that, you conclude that you're not rich. You know why? Because you don't feel rich. You don't feel rich. Some of you are rich, but you don't feel rich because you don't have that margin. You don't have the freedom to spend the money wherever you want to spend it. So if you want to feel rich, you know what you got to do? Downsize. You got to downsize. You got to downsize until you have some margin. Now, let's be honest here. Just saying the word downsize, some of you nearly went into cardiac arrest. Thinking about giving up cable. Some of you just couldn't do it. Thinking about maybe selling the house that you no longer need because all the kids have moved out and moving into a smaller house scares you to death. Sending your kids to public school instead of private school, whoa, you could never do that. But listen, if you want that margin, if you want that feeling of feeling rich, you've got to do some things differently. Drive an old car instead of buying a new one every 3 years. Some of you, though, that word downsize, boy, that really scares you. You break out in a cold sweat. Well, I've got some good news for you. If that's a word that scares you, you're rich. If the word downsize almost brings you to tears, you're rich. If you can't bear the thought of taking a step back in regards to the standard of your living, then that is evidence that you're rich. And one of the side effects of being rich is that rich people confuse being rich with feeling rich. We don't feel rich because we are overextended financially. One of the other side effects of being rich is rich people are plagued by discontentment. I'm going to get to Scripture in a minute. Hang with me here. I got to set it up. The more a person has, the more a person wants. The more you have and I have, the more you want and the more I want. You know, I love Jerry Seinfeld's one of my favorite comedians, and he tells this joke about an appetite. You know, his mom used to say, Jerry, don't eat cookies, you're going to ruin your appetite. And Jerry would say, Mom, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to have another appetite come right behind it. Right? You're not going to run out of appetites. You can't fill your appetite. You eat and you go, oh, I feel great, right? You just did this on Thanksgiving. You eat, your buttons are popping open, you feel great, but what? By the time dinner or by the time the nighttime comes around, you got to have more pumpkin pie because you got another appetite. We're like that when it comes to stuff, when it comes to money. We have this appetite. We desire newer, nicer things. And so we try to fill that appetite. We go out and we buy that new car, we buy that new house, and you know what? We still feel like, I'm still hungry for more. Because you can't fill it. When you feed an appetite, what happens? It grows right back. It comes right back. The cravings become greater. Appetites are never fully and finally satisfied. You think, well, I just need a bit more money. Boy, if I could just make a bit more money, everything's going to be great. But you're wrong. You're wrong. Every time you feed that appetite for newer and nicer things, it grows. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And as that appetite grows, it erodes your margin. It erodes your margin. And the next thing you know, a rich person begins to feel feelings of discontentment. You and I, who have so much money, in the world standards, we begin to feel discontentment. By the way, another byproduct of our desire for more is financial pressure. So many of you feel this huge financial burden. Let's put things in perspective. Could you imagine walking through a third world country, going through the slums of a third world country, or even just a poor neighborhood here in Orange County, and sitting down with one of the residents in those slums or in that poor neighborhood and trying to explain to them the financial pressure you feel? You'd be a little embarrassed, wouldn't you? I would. I'll tell you what your problem is, and I'm not excluding myself. This is my problem too. We're rich, but we don't know how to be rich. We're not good at being rich. We don't do the right things with our finances. We don't do the right things with our income, with our money. And therefore, we don't feel rich. We don't feel blessed. And instead, we have growing feelings of discontentment, and we have a growing feeling of financial pressure. But let me tell you the third and worst side effect of being rich. That's when wealth becomes a substitute for God. Oh, we're all amening, but you wait till I get into this. Preach it. You might regret that. You see, without meaning to, we often allow our hope to shift from God to our wealth. We allow our hope to shift from God's provision to the provision itself. Instead of trusting in God, we trust in what God has given us. It should never be that way. You know, it's God's doing to take care of us, to provide for us. Let me give you a little test. How much money do you think you need to secure your financial future? Just think in your head. Some of you might be working on this right now. How much money are you trying to put away to secure your financial future? How much money, how much wealth do you need to ensure that you are absolutely safe moving forward in life? Guess what? We all have the same answer. The answer is more than we have right now. Right? All of us, but one. And he's a liar. I love him, but all of us, the answer for almost all of us but one is more than we have now. How much do you need to plan for everything that could possibly happen? How much do you need? Well, you need more than you have right now. You see, for us as rich people, the fear of the future has a tendency to drive us away from God and toward a self-centered posturing with our money. In an attempt to secure our own future, we push aside the things of God. We push aside what God says is most important, and we focus in on that provision. We focus in on what God has blessed us with and say, this is how I'm going to protect myself. This is how I'm going to take care of myself in the future. We disregard God's role in it. And we say, I'm going to trust in my ability to gain, to make, to keep, to hoard, to spend or not spend. I'm going to trust my ability. You see, but when we do that, it makes it more difficult for us to give generously like God has called us to give generously. Our hope migrates away from God and toward ourselves or our ability to protect ourselves financially. In the verses that we read earlier from 1 Timothy chapter 6, at the beginning of verse 17, the Apostle Paul strikes right to the heart of the issue. He really hits here on what rich people struggle with the most. He says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant. And then he continues by saying, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. Let's talk just for a minute about the arrogance of the rich. Now, I know people that make a lot of money that aren't arrogant. But with wealth comes this sense of entitlement, doesn't it? Let me just, on the most basic level, let me just break it down for you. And again, this is going to say more about my character than you may want to know. But when I'm in the car, and I come to a lane that is packed with people, and we're all in this one lane waiting to make a left turn, without fail, someone driving a really fancy car comes along on the other lane, waits till the last second, and cuts in front of somebody. And I look at my wife and I say, you know why they do that? Because they think they're better than the rest of us. You know why? They drive a nicer car. Not that I've never seen someone in a Pinto do it. I just haven't seen someone in a Pinto do it since 1978. They think they're special. They think they're entitled to different rules. Now, I know that's the most basic level. That's the simplest thing I can think of. But there is an arrogance oftentimes that comes with wealth. And here Paul says, command those who are rich in this present world, first, not to be arrogant. But then he continues and he says, in order to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. Basically, be careful that as your wealth increases, your hope in God doesn't decrease. That's what Paul's saying here. Don't let your hope move you, or don't let your hope get attached to, don't let your hope be wrapped around your finances or your possessions, because that's a terrible thing to happen. Now in Proverbs chapter 18, we have Solomon, the wisest man that ever walked the earth. Not only that, the Bible tells us that Solomon was the richest man who will ever walk the earth. And in Proverbs 18 verse 11, this is what Solomon says. He says, the wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it a wall too high to scale. You know what he's saying here? He's saying they think that their wealth is going to protect them, but it's not. They think that their wealth is all that they need to ensure their future and their happiness and their well-being, but it's not. They've been fooled. They've been deceived. They've been tricked. Basically, what he's saying is that when you begin to accumulate things, your hope can have a tendency to move away from God and toward those things. But we still think to ourselves, don't we? Well, if I could just save this much money, everything would be all right. Or if I could just make this much money, everything will be all right. But back in 1 Timothy chapter 6, the last part of verse 17 says, but tell people to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for what? For our enjoyment. Here's the takeaway this morning, church. Why would you put your hope in the provision when you have your opportunity to put your hope in the provider? Put your hope in God, who so richly provides. If you have any questions, about what that might look like, about God providing, just look to the cross of Christ. God shares his son with us. And he says, I'm going to give you something before you've ever given me anything. He says, I'm going to share my son with you. I'm going to give you new life, forgiveness from sins. I'm going to give all this to you. Even if you never give me anything, I'm making this available to you. You see, the provider. Why would you hope in the provision when you have a chance to hope in the provider? And the Bible says that God's providing those things. Why? For our enjoyment. Then why is it so stressful? Why is it so difficult? Why is money such a headache? It's because there are side effects to wealth. And you and I haven't been taught how to handle and manage that wealth in a proper, God-honoring way. Most of you, if not all of you, are rich in this present world. By the world's standards, you are wealthy. You're in the top 10% at least. Top 4%, top 1%. You have more money than most people will ever have. You make more money than most people will ever make. And Paul is telling you not to be arrogant and think that your wealth is going to protect you. That's what he's saying. Don't be arrogant. Don't put your hope in wealth. Put your hope in Jesus Christ, who richly provides. So let me ask you this morning as we wrap up. Has your hope moved away from God? Not that you'd admit it out loud, but in your heart, has your hope moved away from God? Has your hope moved away from the Lord and toward other things? Because I think the more that you try to hold on to the things of this world, especially your finances, the more ungrateful and the more selfish you will become. Listen to the words of Jesus in Luke chapter 12, verse 15. Jesus says, "Watch out. Be on guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Jesus is saying that life is not all about what you have. It's not about what you possess. It's not about what you can gain. It's not about what you can save. But most of us, we live by the assumption that if something's in my hand, it must be for me. If something's in my possession, it must be for my delight. It must be for my enjoyment, not for anybody else's. It's for me and for me alone. Guess what? That's greed. That's greed. If you decide to spend the rest of your life trying to build an unscalable financial wall that protects you, you're going to wake up one day miserable. Because you'll have spent the best years of your life chasing something that you can never really catch. Most of you already make far more money than your parents ever did, don't you? And most of you are far more stressed out than your parents ever were. And again, we wonder what's wrong. We wonder why we can't enjoy life. Maybe it's because inside our hope, maybe just a little bit, has moved away from the Lord and more towards our income and more towards our wealth. You can't enjoy what you have. You're not happy. But here's the good news. God is gracious. And God is forgiving. And God's word lays before us a plan that enables us not just to be rich, but to feel rich. And here's more good news. It has very little to do with money. Next week, we're going to look at this second part of these two verses. We're going to look at 1 Timothy 6:18. And we're going to see what God's plan is for overcoming this. Because the bad news is, we don't get a redo. You know, if you spent the years of your children, your children growing up, their child, if you spent that time trying to gain wealth and forsaking them, you don't get to go back and relive that. You just don't. You don't get to go back to your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, wherever you're at, and redo it all. It just doesn't work that way. Paul is telling us, stop putting your hope in riches and instead put your hope in the one who so richly provides. Again, next week, we're going to see what it looks like to be rich in biblical terms. Don't miss this, though. You're rich. In the world's terms, you're rich. Well, Josh, I don't make 40 grand. So what? Like I said, what are you, in the top 10%? Woohoo! You're rich. Get that in your heads right now. You make far more money than most people in this world are ever going to make. So when Paul is talking to Timothy and saying, command those who are rich in this present world, he's talking to you and he's talking to me. But next Sunday, I want to show you that if we can learn to adopt the principle of being generous, then your possessions will never possess you. That's key. What you own will never own you. I want you to learn to enjoy the things that God has blessed you with. But this morning, I want you to remember that your only hope is to be right with God. Your only hope is to be in God, never in the things that God provides. Let's pray.